Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 184. Snuffed Out. Izuku didn't even have the time to finish making the vague, confused, and horrified sound he'd instinctively made before his body was no longer his own. His last act of his own autonomy was to look toward the source of the voice that had called out to him, which wasn't difficult to spot. He saw Hitoshi among the group of his peers clung together in an arcing path over the battlefield, and 1,000 thoughts flitted through his mind in a second. Each one split his focus from fear to fury. Hitoshi knew him well enough to know he wasn't leaving this fight until it was over. He couldn't express the smug satisfaction in knowing that this trick wouldn't last past his first order. The moment Hitoshi made him move, the pain lancing through him would be enough to snap him out of his control. What the hell was he thinking? How could he put himself and their friends at risk like this? How could he violate Izuku's trust like this? Whatever. They could take Kachan, and then he would be safe, and that would be one less thing to worry about. Jump to us. Izuku heard the command in his bones more than he did by ear, and he waited for Hitoshi's control to snap away as his shoulders jostled when he leapt. But it didn't. He felt the pain, sure, but he was still a puppet. If anything, his vision was getting cloudier and he was receding into whatever fog had caught him. Dark mist crept up from the corners of his vision, and it looked far too similar to Kurogiri's power for his comfort. He could still see his surroundings, though, and no one seemed to be at all concerned about the mist, so it must just be in his mind, some sort of hallucination as a result of Hitoshi's influence. You are a very difficult man to contact, Ninth. A woman who could not be there right now emerged from the mist to greet him. What? I'd say he's much easier to contact than most, considering we can contact him at all. Another figure with short-cropped black hair contested. The more he tried to focus on them, the hazier they became, as if they were the mist rather than just emerging from it. It is as we suspected then. Greetings, Ninth. A pleasure to properly meet you. A man with chin-length dusty blonde hair and a strange patterning on his left cheek spoke up. Something told him this was not Hitoshi's quirk. His vision was completely split now. He could see his body's surroundings as well as whatever the hell here was. Todoroki and Ida were holding his limp form between them, and he could hear them coordinating their trajectory with Kachan. He couldn't see Hitoshi now, but he knew he was there, and given the fact that he felt weightless, he assumed Uraraka must be too. He'd heard Kirishima's voice and Yaoyorozu's as well. He could see and hear everything that was happening around him, and yet he wasn't there at all. The mist that had clouded his vision turned into some strange plane where these figures stood. He wasn't seeing double, and the images weren't overlaid. He was just in two places at once, and it was incredibly disorienting. Ninth, you need to stop fighting against this. Toshinori has the situation in hand, and you are in no state to fight. The woman who had first spoken pulled his attention back. His body, if it could be called that here, was sluggish and slow to respond. He tried to tell the woman to shove it, but the words wouldn't form together. He couldn't even make a sound. Hopefully his facial expression was enough to get his point across. He shifted his attention back to his body, his real body, and tried to move, tried to do anything to break the spell he was under, but no matter how much he tried to thrash, nothing happened. He's a fighter. Eighth knows how to pick 'em. A gruff man's voice split his attention again. A broad-shouldered, bald man was staring at him with his arms crossed, and his expression held an air of approval. Izuku ignored him. Just a finger. If he could just move a finger, then maybe he could use One for All to break it. Surely that would be enough to snap himself out of it. There's no use in fighting against all of us. Not in the state you're in. A lithe man with white hair informed him gently. Izuku ignored him. He could see the ground fast approaching their haphazard human missile. That was good. Yeah, that was good. The fall would knock him out of this for sure. If things are as dire as you seem to think they are, then you should know better than to risk One for All by throwing yourself back into that fight, Ninth. Stop resisting. If Eighth can't handle this, you'll get your time when you're ready for it. One of the more distant figures spoke up. Izuku had never wanted to punch someone in the face quite as badly as he did right now, which said a lot given the trajectory his life had taken. He renewed his efforts to fight in this strange place and clawed at the fog surrounding him, with One for All crackling across his skin, though it didn't seem to do much of anything. So he quickly shifted his focus back to his body. Kacchan let off a few explosions to slow their descent, and Izuku could only hope that it wouldn't be enough for a soft landing. Even I knew that was a stupid thing to say. The bald man snapped back at the last figure who had spoken. Izuku could hear them squabble as the ground approached slower than he would have liked. Boys, that's enough! The woman snapped at all of them before turning her attention back to him. Izuku, Toshinori has this. You need to trust him, please. He did his best to snarl at her as he watched his body fall on top of a messy heap of his peers. Someone grabbed his shoulders to pull him to his feet, and sweet, got me that hurt. He pressed into the pain with all his might. Don't touch him, Hitoshi called out, and the painful grip fell away. Damn it! Hitoshi was standing on unsteady feet with a pained expression, and there was sweat on his brow. Maintaining his control was a struggle, which meant that Izuku could fight it. He summoned One for All with everything he had and watched as Hitoshi stumbled back, only to be caught by Uraraka and Yaoyorozu. Blood started to flow freely from his nose, and Izuku would have felt bad about it if he weren't so angry. He could hear the plaza around them. He could hear the news being broadcast on the screen above them, and by some miracle, his eyes followed his command to watch. Of all the orders for his body to comply with, why did it have to be that one? The shaky camera footage from a news helicopter centered on All Might's emaciated frame. He knelt there shaking with blood dripping out of the corners of his mouth for all the world to see. All for One stood over him with mutated abominations of fists poised to strike, and Izuku screamed though his body didn't move a muscle. Ninth, don't! The woman in his mind tried to cover his eyes, but she couldn't cover his real eyes. She couldn't protect him. Not really. He shouted and fought with all he had, but his power seemed to amount to nothing in whatever this place was. The woman held him like he was nothing more than a toddler throwing a tantrum. The barest spark of hope bloomed in his chest when the hit All for One had been poised to deliver never connected, and All Might got to his feet. Izuku watched as All Might swung a bit of metal rebar against the mask his opponent wore, and it felt like both of the worlds he was split between froze. All for One didn't get up. All Might swayed unsteadily on his feet as he raised his bloodied, mangled fist into the air. The pose of victory was undercut as he, too, crumpled to the ground. Before his limp form could even settle on the rubble beneath him, Izuku felt like the fire he hadn't even realized he'd been sitting next to was snuffed out in an instant. He felt frigid as a sensation not all that dissimilar to being whipped with the end of Eraser's capture weapon hit him somewhere just left of center in his chest. The last thing he saw in this, whatever this place was a yellow figure materializing before him, tall and lanky, looking far too similar to All Might than he had the stomach to bear. Ninth. They had called him Ninth. No, God, no, it couldn't be. There was a screen in the plaza broadcasting All Might's fight, and Hitoshi saw Izuku's eyes drift toward it, despite the fact that that shouldn't have been possible. Though some background part of his mind mused, none of this should have been possible. That flight should have been enough to pull Izuku out of his control, and that landing definitely should have been enough. Yet he could still feel his hold, weak and hanging on by a thread. He couldn't look at the screen. He couldn't stop to think about what the gasps and eerie silence of the crowd meant, because the second he let his mind wander, Izuku would be gone, straight back into that fight, and there wouldn't be a damn thing anyone could do to stop him. Izuku looked awful. Bits of dried blood stuck to his hair and cracked lips. His skin was sallow from bruises spanning from his shoulder up the right side of his face. He was in no shape to fight. If Hitoshi let go, well, it didn't bear to think about. He could hold on. He had to. This was All Might, for heaven's sake. He was going to win. Hitoshi just had to wait. He held on even though he could feel his whole body trembling with the effort. He held on through the splitting headache he was forcing upon himself. He held on when he heard the crowd cheer. That meant it was over, right? He could let go now, right? He was too scared to look up, just in case he was wrong, so he held on. Not that it did him any good in the end. His hold snapped violently, so much so that he physically recoiled. He hadn't realized he was being held upright until then. Yaoyorozu and Uraraka were each holding one of his arms, and they caught him before he fell. His head hurt like nothing he'd ever felt before, and he instinctively went to put pressure on his temples and cover his eyes. But given that his arms were draped over their shoulders, he didn't get very far with that. His pain was pushed to the back of his mind when he looked back up at Izuku. It was like the world moved in slow motion as Hitoshi watched him. His quirk had flared up around him the moment he had regained control of his body, and Hitoshi was so scared he was about to bolt. That the fight wasn't over, and he was about to lose him again after everything. But he didn't. He just fell to his knees. Hitoshi watched as the concrete cracked around the impact. He wasn't sure if the world had gone silent or if he was just too out of it to hear properly, but his question was answered when he heard Izuku scream. It felt like the noise pulled all the air out of his chest. He hadn't heard Izuku scream like that since the USJ. Hearing it a second time didn't make it any easier. He tried to go to him, but his legs gave out the moment he put weight on them. Yaoyorozu was pressing a handkerchief to his face, and when she pulled it back to fold it over, he saw blood. He realized he could taste blood, too. Any thoughts he had about that were interrupted when Izuku's scream turned to sobs. He was hunched over with one hand fisted into the fabric of his shirt over his heart, and the other was shaking with the effort it took to hold himself upright. Hitoshi risked a glance up toward the screen just in time to see it go black. The last image it had shown burned itself into Hitoshi's mind forever. A man, frail and bloodied, lay limply on a pile of rubble. His blonde hair was stained red where it hung down his face, and his sunken eyes were half closed and lifeless. Only a sliver of icy blue shone from beneath his eyelids. He was wearing All Might's costume. That rubble had been the warehouse they'd just left. That TV had been showing the fight they had just fled from. That man had been, it was supposed to be me! Izuku's barely coherent sobs pulled his attention back. His voice was wrecked, and it broke on nearly every word. Hitoshi ached to comfort him, but he could barely even take in what he was witnessing past the pain in his head. He had the passing thought to ask Yaoyorozu and Uraraka to help him to Izuku's side, and he was about to attempt to voice it when Izuku looked up at him. Any thought he had behind ice-cold fear left his mind the moment those electric green eyes met his own. There were tears streaming down his face and cutting clean paths through the grime and dirt on his skin, but that did nothing to detract from the palpable fury radiating from him in waves. He was looking at Hitoshi with nothing short of hatred. The hand that Izuku had pressed to the concrete to hold him up was now clutched around a handful of rubble, and the scent of ozone permeated the air. It was the smell of an open field just before lightning strikes. Izuku's quirk crackled around him, and the look on his face made Hitoshi feel like the lone tree among the plains. He didn't stand a chance. You freaking bastard! It was supposed to be me! Izuku's voice was the only sound in the plaza, and it echoed between the buildings towering above them. Hitoshi's momentary fear turned into all-consuming shame the moment Izuku collapsed on himself again. His shouting became incoherent babbles interrupted by shuddering, full-bodied sobs. And like so many times before, Hitoshi just watched. He didn't move. Hell, he didn't even breathe as his best friend fell to pieces in front of him. His eyes drifted away from Izuku because he couldn't bear to watch, and he saw that he wasn't the only one frozen. Ida was holding Todoroki back from approaching Izuku, but Todoroki wasn't trying to move. Not anymore. Kirishima had his hands on Bakugo's arms, seemingly paused halfway through trying to check the bandages that Hitoshi hadn't even noticed before. There was blood seeping through the sterile white, but both of them stood motionless, staring somewhere between Izuku and the blank television. Some people in the crowd were looking at Izuku too, but most were staring vacantly at the TV. The silent horror of the crowd was suffocating, and Hitoshi was glad to hear it broken by something other than Izuku's sobs. Izuku! A voice too loud to be natural left his ears ringing. Hitoshi felt a sick sense of deja vu when he saw President Mike sprinting toward them. The only missing thing was Eraserhead with a grade 3 concussion. Mike ran straight for Izuku, heedless of the broken and cracking concrete and the palpable force surrounding him. They stumbled and fell next to Izuku with less grace than they generally held themselves with. But Hitoshi was just glad that whatever the hell was going on with Izuku right now didn't turn them into a pancake on contact. They pulled his shaking body against their chest, and Hitoshi was surprised to see Izuku rest his head against their shoulder rather than turn away. Maybe he was just out of it, or maybe Hitoshi was missing something. How did Yamada-sensei even know where they were? He'd told Uraraka to text Aizawa, not the crowd gasping snapped his attention away from the scene in front of him and up toward the sky where Hitoshi saw one of the last things he would have expected to see. Aizawa, precariously dangling from the number 3, well, maybe number 2, hero's arms as they shouted at each other. Let me down! Let me get you to the damn ground first, you crazy... Gah! Hawks tried to argue as he failed to hold onto Aizawa's forearms. He was wearing the same suit he had been during the press release earlier, sans the jacket and tie, but that didn't seem to inhibit his ability to roll with his momentum and back up onto his feet after what must have been at least a 15-foot drop. He didn't even break stride as he sprinted toward them. He paused to look at Mike, who signed something over Izuku's back at him. Hitoshi saw him take a shaky breath as he watched the two of them for a second before turning to the rest of the group. His presence was enough to signal to Hitoshi's brain that it was over now, and any remaining adrenaline coursing through him left in an instant. Uraraka and Yaoyorozu were still holding most of his weight. He could feel them lowering him to the ground to sit. It was over. They'd gotten Izuku back. For better or worse, it was over. The scene Shota dropped into was chaos. Hizashi had Izuku and he was in one piece, but he was crying his eyes out in a way that Shota hadn't heard since the night he almost lost them. The heaving, broken sobs grated on his ears, and he wanted nothing more than to run to them and pull them both into his arms. But Izuku wasn't the only one hurt. He had a duty to all of his students, not just Izuku. Izuku was babbling something that Shota couldn't quite make out. So he raised an eyebrow in question when he caught Hizashi's eye. Their expression was solemn and pained. They didn't look relieved in the slightest, and Shota was about to ignore the rest of his students and march over there because if Izuku was not okay, he was going to lose it. However, Hizashi beat him to the punch and signed to him over Izuku's back. He said that All Might is dead. Shota stopped in his tracks before he even made his first step. It felt like all the air left his lungs. All Might wasn't exactly his favorite person right now, but he was All Might, for crying out loud. He'd been All Might since before Shota was even born. He knew Yagi's health was failing. He knew he wasn't half as strong as he used to be, but surely there was no way that... He turned away, took a deep breath, and forced himself to press forward. His job wasn't done. Shinso was sitting between Yaoyorozu and Uraraka with a dazed expression and blood flowing freely from his nose. Todoroki and Ida were frozen in place, and Kirishima was prodding at Bakugo's bandaged arms, though the latter didn't seem aware of that as he stared blankly at the scene unfolding in front of him. Ambulance en route, Hawks notified him from above. He just nodded in acknowledgement as he slowly approached his student. Bakugo, he called out quietly. His eyes were as sharp as ever when they flicked to him, but he didn't say anything. What are your injuries? He asked, waving Kirishima's hands away. I'm fine, he bit back in response. He was certainly not fine. His lips were chapped and cracking. He likely hadn't had anything to drink since he was abducted. He looked over to Hawks, held up his hand and stuck his pinky and thumb out, tipping it toward himself in the universal sign for beverage. Given how promptly Hawks responded, he assumed his message had gotten across. Not what I asked, he replied calmly. Got scratched up. It's fine. He stitched me up. I'm fine. Bakugo stumbled over his words. Shota looked him over thoroughly before relenting. Hawks will be back with water. Drink it slowly, he instructed. He waited for Bakugo to nod in acknowledgement before he turned to the other boy. Kirishima? His eyes widened in fear, and he looked sheepishly down at his feet before responding. It seemed he already knew how much trouble he was in. Good. Uninjured, sir, he confirmed. Shota didn't bother replying and quickly shifted his focus to who he had no doubt was the instigator of this whole mission. The damn kid spent too much time around Izuku to not have his reckless tendencies rub off. Shinso was holding a handkerchief to his nose with his head tilted back and his eyes screwed shut. He looked to be in a great deal of pain. Injuries? He looked to Yaoyorozu. We're fine. I think Shinso overused his quirk. We... Shinso advised us that Midoriya was unlikely to leave with us of his own volition, so he... She trailed off, letting the implications stand for themselves. Shinso, are you all right? He asked him directly. Headache. He choked out one-word response. Understood. He returned in kind. Both of the girls looked sufficiently cowed by his curtness, but Shinso seemed to be in too much pain to acknowledge it. Yaoyorozu, make sure everyone contacts their parents. We will convene at the hospital. He dismissed himself with the order. It felt like it took eons to confirm everyone else was uninjured, though in reality it couldn't have been more than 3 minutes. Hawks had returned with water, and Shota corralled the rest of the students around him before taking one of the water bottles to Izuku. Hizashi was still holding him as he sobbed, though it didn't seem like he was still trying to talk like he had been when Shota got there. Injuries? Shota asked for what felt like the 100th time this semester. I don't know. I can barely get a word out of him. He's got blood in his hair and on his hands, but the only cut I can find is one on his jaw, so I assume most of the blood isn't his, Hizashi answered. He said he broke his collarbone, and maybe his jaw and nose, but he wasn't sure. Bakugo answered from behind him. He hadn't realized Bakugo had followed. He'd been too focused on Izuku. He had heard Shinso, Shoji, and Todoroki's report of the incident at the camp, so Shota didn't doubt that most of the blood wasn't Izuku's. It was a sick thing to be grateful for. Thank you. Please sit down and drink your water. The ambulance will be here shortly. Shota replied, doing his best to dismiss him without outright saying it. He's dead? Bakugo asked, ignoring his order. Shota glanced at Hizashi with a questioning look, which was returned with just as much confusion. You've been teaching in sign language all semester. Do you think I was too stupid to catch on? Bakugo sneered when neither of them responded. His tone was as brash as it ever was, but his hands were shaking. As much as Shota hated what Bakugo had done to Izuku, he was still a kid. He was just a kid who was raised wrong and had gone through hell. I don't know, he answered honestly. Any further conversation was cut off by wailing sirens and the screeching of ambulance tires. End of chapter.